Trump will sign his Speak Beautiful bill into law today after kicking off America's 250th celebrations in Iowa last night.
In a few moments, we're going to make official the greatest victory yet when I sign the one big, beautiful.
Just as fireworks lit up Washington on Independence Day, another kind of explosion was quietly primed behind the scenes, an ultimatum from the White House threatening to detonate a $1.3 trillion shockwave across global supply chains. At the heart of the target, Canada, where $62 billion in trade tied to steel, aluminum, and autos now hangs by the click of a send button. President Trump's plan? A sweeping 10% to 70% tariff regime that goes live August 1st, pressuring countries to sign trade deals now or face the consequences. Within 48 hours, the UK and Vietnam scrambled to ink agreements, narrowly dodging the tariff blade. But Ottawa held its silence strategically. Prime Minister Mark Carney, former Bank of England chief and master of timing, didn't rush. Instead, he's executing a counterplay meant to transform America's fireworks into thunder rolling back toward the White House. Launching what could become the most high-stakes trade showdown in North America since NAFTA was signed in 1994. In this episode, Red Alert Media unpacks the behind-the-scenes moves shaping Trump's escalating tariff push and Carney's slow-burn strategy to derail it. Just hours before Canada's 3% digital services tax was set to hit tech giants like Amazon, Google, and Meta on June 30th, the Carney government quietly scrapped it, reopening a path for negotiation. But Carney made it clear, this wasn't surrender, it was bait. While London and Hanoi rushed into provisional deals, Carney played a longer game, refusing to bow to what he called an artificial deadline. Negotiating with someone who changes the rules mid-game is like playing chess with a foghorn, he quipped. So, instead of sprinting, Canada pivoted to delay. Ottawa slowed technical rounds. Meeting dates were pushed. Legal annexes multiplied. And U.S. negotiators were gradually forced to expose deeper demands. EV quotas, battery chain controls, even steel capacity caps. Meanwhile, the White House took to Twitter, celebrating a win with two fresh deals, a 10% tariff cap on 100,000 British cars, and a 20 to 40% arrangement with Vietnam to curb Chinese transshipments. But beneath the headlines, those moves covered just 1% of total U.S. imports. Ottawa, in contrast, stayed silent and sharp. Canada's parliament held 3 closed-door hearings in a single week, zeroing in on the milk fortress, a fiercely protected quota and tariff system, with rates as high as 300% that shields Canadian dairy producers. Under pressure from the Farmers Alliance, MPs passed legislation that formally locks supply management out of any trade deal, drawing a rare public admission from a U.S. trade official. This was now the largest bottleneck. The blowback was swift. On July 11th, Trump suddenly escalated, declaring a 35% tariff on Canadian imports, warning it could go higher if Ottawa kept dragging its feet. Carney's response? Not outrage, but numbers. Canada buys $349.4 billion in American goods annually, more than Germany and Japan combined. If tariffs land, the Detroit to Chicago supply chain is where the pain begins. This is Carney's style, quiet but calculated. He handed Washington a token concession, but built an unshakable legal firewall around his key assets, dairy, green steel, and EV batteries. Now, pressure is boomeranging back. U.S. businesses, from Silicon Valley to Michigan's Auto Belt, are demanding clarity, and fast. With August 1st looming, Trump needs a win. But Carney won't blink easily. So what happens next? Will the White House climb down, or push toward the full 70% tariff threat floated earlier this month? And if Trump presses the button, what's Carney's next counterstrike beyond the paused digital tax? Will Ottawa unleash a broader retaliation to shield nearly 900,000 Canadian jobs linked to the steel-auto-aluminum nexus? The answer could shape the fate of North America's trade for the next decade and turn this year's Independence Day celebration into the opening volley of a full-blown tariff war. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Red Alert Media and turn on notifications so you never miss a crucial economic update. The trade standoff isn't just about steel and aluminum anymore. Milk has emerged as the critical red line that neither side dares to cross in this escalating trade war. Canada's fiercely protected supply management system, with its strict quotas and sky-high import tariffs of over 300% on milk beyond those quotas, safeguards an estimated 339,000 jobs, primarily concentrated in Ontario and Quebec. These provinces hold the key to 170 parliamentary seats, making dairy not just a breakfast item but a potential election decider for any sitting prime minister. From Washington, President Trump has slammed this system as a blatant stronghold of protectionism. He accuses Ottawa of crippling American dairy farmers with three-digit tariffs and is demanding the immediate dismantling of milk quotas, along with a forced opening of 15% of the Canadian dairy market to U.S. products. On his platform Truth Social, Trump repeatedly highlights what he calls Canada's tremendously high tariffs, insisting this so-called milk wall surpasses the 2018 steel tariffs in scale. His aim is unmistakable: demolish the last major defense in North American agriculture and claim a high-profile win for Wisconsin's dairy industry ahead of the midterms. But Canada has responded with legal armor. On August 8, in a unanimous 289-0 vote, the House of Commons passed Bill C-98, widely dubbed the Supply Management Shield. The bill explicitly bars any minister from altering tariffs or quotas outside the established system. 3 days later, the Senate quickly followed suit, locking the legislation into law just before Parliament's summer break. Reuters described it as a rare show of full-spectrum political unity that effectively froze negotiations. The legislation hit the White House like a thunderclap. While Carney dangled a small concession via digital services tax negotiations, he slammed the dairy gate shut right where Trump most wanted it open. On the same day, Canada's Agriculture Ministry issued a sobering report: dismantling the quota system could collapse domestic milk prices by 18% within 3 months, vaporize $6 billion in farm asset value, and put 72,000 food processing jobs in Quebec City and Toronto at risk. The message to Washington couldn't be clearer: tamper with milk, and you're tampering with Canada's constitutional backbone. The dairy farmers of Canada launched the now viral Hands Off Our Milk campaign, plastering green and white protest signs along Highway 401. Milk, once a household staple, is now a political landmine waiting to detonate at every Trump rally across Michigan. This has left the Oval Office boxed in. Lowering tariffs means bowing to Carney's blockade and possibly alienating U.S. rural voters. But going nuclear with the full 70% tariff would invite immediate retaliation. Detroit, the epicenter of U.S. auto exports to Canada, would be hit with a $35 billion counterblow via Canadian steel and aluminum duties. A senior White House advisor admitted to Reuters that Carney had outmaneuvered them. By offering a token concession while shutting the dairy door, he forced the U.S. to absorb both the economic blow and the loss of negotiating power. Major sectors like dairy, auto manufacturing, and retail giants like Walmart now face the possibility of 50% price hikes on cheese, tin, and vehicle parts. That looming threat explains why, as fireworks lit up the skies on July 4, Carney simply folded his arms and let the pressure mount. With Bill C-98 now law, Canada has essentially cornered negotiations in a diplomatic dead end. For the U.S. to secure a deal, it must retreat. But to push forward invites spiraling economic and political consequences. Through the narrow lens of supply management, Carney has transformed domestic dairy policy into a geopolitical power play, reflecting America's threats right back toward the White House. Now, with the entire $1.3 trillion North American trade pipeline hanging by a thread and a 70% tariff threat looming, the question in Washington is no longer whether Canadian milk is overprotected, it's whether confronting it is worth risking the whole system. D-Day looms large. With just over 2 weeks left until the July 21 deadline, the White House is laser-focused on one number: 70%. That's the top tier of a sliding tariff scale Trump says will activate August 1 if Canada doesn't fold. And it's not an idle threat. In his Independence Day message, Trump pledged to send an official letter to Ottawa outlining tariff bans from 10% to 70%, citing recent success imposing similar strategies on the UK and Vietnam. For North America's tightly woven steel, aluminum, and auto industries, that warning isn't just political bluster, it's a live charge sitting under the factory floor. A mere doubling of steel and aluminum tariffs to 50% on June 4 sent shockwaves through the market. According to Reuters, Midwest hot-rolled coil prices surged by 22% in just a month, prompting construction firms to delay bids. In Oshawa, General Motors slashed a production shift, laid off 700 workers, and rerouted some exports back to the US. A move the company bluntly described as a mandatory response to the escalating tariff wall. In Windsor, Stellantis postponed the launch of its Daytona RT line, while across the border, Michigan lawmakers were delivered a sobering projection: 13,000 jobs at risk within 5 years, draining $456 million from the state budget. Yet, Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen a calm countdown over chaos. In response, Ottawa unveiled a $6.5 billion C-80 fire-safe vault to Parliament, $5 billion to help exporters enter new markets, $1 billion to support agri-food resilience, and $500 million in low-interest loans. Sources confirm that $4 billion of this package is earmarked to reinforce the Ontario-Quebec steel, aluminum, and EV battery corridor, Canada's industrial shield against a looming 70% tariff strike. Simultaneously, Canada's foreign ministry has been fortifying escape routes. Steel quota expansions are under negotiation with the EU, FTA talks with Japan have reopened, and on June 15, a UK-Canada Economic Working Group was launched to diversify trade. But Washington is not backing down. On July 10, President Trump pivoted from economics to politics, accusing 11 of Canada's 13 provinces of blocking US products from supermarket shelves. He threatened to expand sanctions to softwood lumber, beef, and even pharmaceuticals, targeting US rural voters already disgruntled over Canada's closed dairy market. Lobbyists in Georgetown estimate that if pharmaceutical tariffs enter the fray, US import costs for raw materials could spike by $2 billion, leading to higher drug prices just ahead of the midterms. In this charged climate, Carney chose strategy over panic. At a TUR press conference, he stated, "Canada does not seek confrontation, but we will protect our workers." True to that promise, the Commerce Ministry activated Diversify 2025, a plan allowing Canadian companies to raise EU export quotas by 15% automatically when hit by US tariffs. It also scraps import duties on components from ASEAN under an FTA process initiated on July 10. The market's reaction was swift. The Canadian dollar dipped 1.4%, but Rio Tinto Canada's shares jumped as Ottawa hinted at new capital injections to offset rising US aluminum costs. Meanwhile, labor unions are sounding the alarm. Unifor warns that a 70% tariff could cost 45,000 jobs across Windsor, Detroit, Oshawa, and the Golden Triangle within 3 quarters, enough to tip Ontario into a technical recession. The trade clock is ticking louder by the day. To reach a deal before the July 21 deadline, Washington must either de-escalate and accept modest concessions from Ottawa or pull the 70% trigger. Gambling on a twin recession that could gut jobs on both sides of the border. Carney is staking his credibility on one principle: steadfastness. If Canada withstands the night of July 21, it earns critical time to lock in new FTAs and rewire supply chains beyond the White House's reach. Should that happen, the 70% threat may ricochet back at Trump just as election season peaks. Today, the 49th parallel marks more than a border, it's a fault line between coercion and calculated endurance. Trump's 70% tariff is not merely an economic weapon, it strikes at the resilience of a historic ally. Conversely, Carney's quiet yet resolute posture sends a warning: if you try to bring Canada to its knees, be ready to fracture America's own supply chain. If Trump succeeds, world capitals will take note, sign quickly or suffer. Capitol Hill would gain a potent precedent for future hardball tactics. But if Canada holds the line, Washington will have to concede that tariffs, no matter how heavy, are no match for a long-game strategy crafted with precision. That's why July 21 won't just name a winner, it will determine whether North America's most vital economic alliance endures through diplomacy or shatters under pressure. What's your take on Trump's 70% gamble? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe on Red Alert Media to stay informed on the world's most pivotal economic battles.